So I do need a volunteer if someone is feeling brave this morning. And before you jump at that, let me define brave. That means you trust me. Do we have anyone that brave in here this morning? All right, Kathy. Kathy's feeling really brave after she took a whole week and left me behind while she was in Antigua. So we're going to see how this works. All right, so while Kathy's coming forward, there's a game that we used to play as children. Perhaps many of you remember it. Now this bucket is here just in case anything happens that you need it for. So just let that be what it is. But if you were children, you probably remember this. There was that opportunity where you got to mess with some folks a little bit. And you would say, I want you to open your mouth and close your eyes. And I will give you a sweet surprise. She said, as long as it's not coconut and raisin. So Kathy, what I need you to do is close your eyes for me. And you need to trust me. You need to keep your eyes closed, no peeking. There is no opportunity to see what I'm about to give you. All right? They didn't give you anything there, did they? No? Okay. So Kathy... I heard my husband, she says. So Kathy is going to be brave here. She is going to trust me. Shh. You guys can't ruin this. So Kathy, do you trust me?
I work with you, yes.
That doesn't prove anything. So Kathy, I need you to keep your eyes closed and open your mouth. Are you sure you want to do this?
I trust you.
She trusts me, so here we go. Open your mouth. Got it? All right. Not as bad as you thought, right? See, you guys can trust me. What are your problems out there? Jeez. You can open your eyes now, yes. It was a Hershey's Kiss. Now, what I love about that game is it helps us get at an understanding of trust. Job learns a really valuable lesson in trusting God, even though he can't see what God is doing fully. And that's the kind of trust we need to learn to have with our God, is that even when things are uncertain and we're not sure what's coming next, God has good things in store for us if we just trust him. Let's have a word of prayer real quick. God, we do trust you. Help us to trust you even more, that even in the midst of the hard times that we face, you are with us and you have good things for us, even if we can't understand them in the moment. Amen. Well, there were once two friends named Larry and Kareem who spent many days together on the playground during recess in school. Now, Larry was the youngest boy in class, and so he was a little behind on the growth curve and was deathly afraid of heights. Every day while everyone else looked forward to recess, Larry became scared and anxious. He couldn't run fast, couldn't kick a ball accurately, or even gather enough strength to slide down the large slide there on the playground. Kareem, however, was the kid picked first for dodgeball. He was tall and athletic, and he became Larry's greatest cheerleader. He would stand behind Larry on the slide singing, "Go, Larry, go. You can do this." Every day, Kareem sang, "Go, Larry, go. You can do this." And with every day they played together, Larry grew more fearless and enjoyed recess more and more. Until one day, Kareem became very sick, and he was out of school for an entire week. Larry stared down that view of that long slide, and it began to grow longer and deeper as he looked down, and he turned to safely go back to solid ground instead, but a voice in his head rang out, "Go, Larry, go. You can do this." Larry turned back around, took a deep breath, and slid down that slide without apprehension. You see, a good friend, even in absence, helps discover things in us that we never knew existed. Kareem, in many ways, helped restore Larry's sense of strength, courage, and faith. We spent the past 3 Sundays exploring Job's wrestling in his faith. He was an upright man whom God delighted over. He would point him out at every opportunity, it seemed, to say, "Look how wonderful my servant Job is. He is such a righteous man." But somewhere along the line, tragedy after tragedy struck when Satan was allowed to torment him and take everything he had, including his health. Job felt the pressure of trying to understand why he had found himself in this place of darkness and suffering. Disoriented, he looked around in shock at all that had fallen down so quickly. Job felt the burden of feeling no support from anyone, including his wife and his best friends, who simply made him feel worse. Deserted, he couldn't even feel the presence of God right beside him. Job felt the deafening power of the God of the universe who showed up and caused him to shut his mouth in order to finally hear from God. Silenced, he recognized that God was always with him and learned the humility of simply listening to God instead of talking so much. And today, Job recognizes now what he has overcome with God's help. Like Larry, Job was weak, fragile, and not able to fully see the situation that was happening. He balked when he was faced with the reality of suffering in this world, but God revealed that he could grow from it and rise again. You see, our eyes are blurry when it comes to trying to understand God's wisdom sometimes. If you're like me and you wear contacts, and especially this morning when I woke up and my eyes were dry and I put my contacts in and they were still blurry for the next 15 minutes, or if you wear glasses to correct your vision, you know how difficult it is to operate without them. And when we try to pretend like we know exactly what God is up to all the time and speak on what we cannot fully understand, things might end up similar to this poor lady in this video I want to show you here real quick this morning.
Here, kitty. Meezer. Here, kitty. Oh, please come snuggle with Mama. It's a good girl.
Trust me when I say, you do not want to snuggle with one of those guys. They are cute, but they are anything but snuggly. Like our friend Larry, Job needed to know he had the ability to endure what he was going through. And God knew that he could, even if Job didn't. Job experienced God, though, and he began to fully grasp the wisdom of knowing his role in the relationship he had with the Lord. He began to recognize that as a human being, finite in stature and knowledge, his ability to see God's plans in everything was at best blurry. But God has better than perfect vision. His plans are unopposable and unstoppable in the end. And Job learned from this encounter that even when his perception was difficult in what God was doing, God will provide comfort and strength to endure. See, Job's idea of God was based on rewards and punishment because of the false wisdom that so many up until that point had believed in. God blesses good behavior and punishes bad. This type of karma-like approach to our relationship with God is clearly flawed. And it clearly began to be revealed as false when people were still suffering even as good people. And all around them, evil, sinful people were flourishing. People began to wrestle with, this is not matching up with that conventional wisdom we once thought. And you see, David, king of Israel, also saw that same problem. And he expresses this concern in Psalm 13. He struggles as he looks around and he sees these evil people taking root, flourishing, and they're moving to destroy him in his role as the king of Israel. And they are getting closer and closer, and he feels that pressure bearing down on him. And he doesn't even seem to know if God is listening anymore. But at the very end of that psalm, it's a short one, but in verses 5 and 6, he learns the same lesson that Job learns. He says this, "But I trust in your unfailing love. My heart rejoices in your salvation. I will sing to the Lord, for he has been good to me." In his distress, David acknowledges that his situation is difficult and sin appears to be going unchecked. But he knows that God is not absent. And even in the struggle that he is facing, there's reason to trust that God is still there. When Job realizes that his sight was limited in regards to God's ways, he begins to work at changing his expectations. Job realizes he was never really, truly, fully in control of what he had in life. His wealth, his family, not even his own health at some level was in his control. And in recognizing this in humility, he is able to grow in his trust that God's hand is at work in his life. And it's up to us as disciples to find it within us to be faithful to trusting that God is also at work in our lives and be obedient to his will, even if we don't fully understand it in the moment. How does it feel to rely on things you can't see? How does it feel to close your eyes and open your mouth and trust that whatever is going to be put there isn't going to be disgusting? How ironic is it that the moment Job stops trying to figure God out fully and prays in humility is the moment that God restores him? Now, it's easy to think that Job's restoration in this story is really about a return to health, wealth, and plenty. But that's not the restoration, I think, that really truly happens in these moments. The material things of this world were external and temporary, and as I mentioned before, Job really didn't have control over them. No, the restoration here that I think Job truly experiences is a change in perspective. It's a restoration to seeing the God of love who is at work in his life. And it's this sense of contentment and fullness that he's able to find when he changes his expectations. Although we cannot fully understand the mind of God in the midst of personal pain and hurt, we can change our perspective even when we cannot change our circumstances. The best thing we can do in those moments is turn our gaze heavenward, cry out to God, and trust him. Even though it flies in the face of conventional wisdom today that says we pull ourselves up by our own bootstraps, God doesn't want a proud heart or someone who solely relies upon themselves for everything. He wants us to be willing to submit and recognize we aren't capable of doing everything on our own. We need his strength to help us through the tough times. A humble heart recognizes that. And it's in a humble heart that God is able to do his most amazing work. I want to tell you the story of Billy. Billy was a young boy who loved to spend time with his grandfather when he walked to school daily. Billy's grandfather had this tradition that they would always stop at the neighborhood store. He would pick up his newspaper and a cup of coffee to take with him, and Billy would join him in that venture. Now, every time Billy's grandpa would check out at the register, Billy would point to these large bins that were filled with gum and candies and all sorts of sweets that were displayed right there at the checkout. And each morning he would ask, Grandpa would deny Billy's request. Now, after several weeks of noticing this same duo coming into his store, the clerk started to grow some compassion for poor Billy. And one day, as the two approached the counter, the clerk told Billy, "Go ahead, reach into those bins and take a handful of candy, free of charge. Billy smiled the biggest smile I think he'd ever smiled, and he went to reach in only to pause. He turned to his grandfather, he looked at him, and in a split second he grabbed his grandfather's hand and shoved it into the candy bin. Grandpa was shocked and he didn't know what to do, so he grasped the candy as much as he could and pulled it out. And Billy was giggling and clapping along as he watched his grandfather hoist out this huge bundle of candy from the bin. As they walked on their way, Grandpa asked Billy why he hadn't picked out his own candy, because that was something he'd been wanting to do for so long. Billy, munching away on a piece of taffy, smiled at his grandfather and said, "Yeah, but your hands are a lot bigger. I couldn't get all the candy I wanted, but you could." I think we need to embrace that kind of wisdom that Billy had there in our relationship with God, don't we? God's hands are much bigger, more capable, and able to provide everything we need. Our hands, our thoughts, and our understanding of God's ways are limited in comparison to God's vast knowledge and powerful hands. And this faith that God restores our fortune and our joys and everlasting life sets the stage now as we approach Advent for another story, not unlike Job's in some ways. The Son of God is about to step into this world to restore us. Jesus will find himself amongst the chaos of our sinful world and bring disorientation to those around him about this idea of who the Messiah truly is. But he will also bring light to the darkness and hope to the desolate. Jesus will be deserted by his friends and closest disciples as he nears his final destination. Jesus will feel the silence of God as he hangs on the cross for us. But his humility and trust in God in the midst of that will lead him to show God's love for his whole creation. And like Job, he will be restored from death to life and reign forever on the throne of heaven, calling us to kneel before him and join in the restoration that is coming. Amen.